That's, a good number. That's good to see.
Have a job.
Thank you for that. So it sounds like we've got about a 50-50 split of people which we thought would be the case, who are working in publishing and those who are kind of keen to get into publishing. So hopefully we can demystify a little bit of the process and talk about what it's like to work in publishing for you. Just to tell you a bit about Bloomsbury. Bloomsbury was founded 31 years ago by our chief executive Nigel Newton in 1986. It started off doing adult literary fiction, and I think it's fair to say that that's still, as Lisa said, with a Man Booker winner this year, is still such an important part and sort of almost the heart of the company. In 1997, 20 years ago, we published Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and that kind of took Bloomsbury into a totally different realm. We got listed on the London Stock Exchange. Last year our turnover was about 130 million. Bloomsbury employs about 650 people worldwide. We have offices in Sydney in Australia, New Delhi in India, New York, and in London and various other locations around the UK, and also in Dublin in Ireland. We publish about 2,200 books a year now. Half of those are academic, so about 1,100, 1,200 a year are academic, and then the rest are across a range of all our divisions: adult, children, education, professional. So it's a really wide range. Anyway, so that's a quick introduction to Bloomsbury. So I'm going to turn to the panel now, and we're going to run through all the questions. We've got some initial questions which are just general about Bloomsbury and about publishing, and then we're going to go into more specific ones aimed at individual members of the panel to tell us more about their particular roles. So, first of all, if I could ask everybody on the panel, each in turn, probably starting with Alison, just to tell us a little bit about what your current role is, what you do, and then we'll and go from there.
Yep. So I'm sorry, I must apologise for my voice, which is, as you can tell, I don't normally sound like this, I promise. I'm Alison, and I joined Bloomsbury last summer to set up our new imprint called Raven Books, which specialises in all things crime, thrillers, suspense, ghost stories and gothic. So my role is basically day-to-day, I run Raven. My job is to find, hopefully, the brilliant new books of the future and to publish them as well as I possibly can.
I'm Greg HEINIMANN. I'm Assistant Art Director for the Adult Trade Division, so I illustrate and design all of our quality fiction and non-fiction, and I guess that's what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is quite nice. So just playing with box of tricks upstairs and trying to do some good covers.
And I'm Jacqueline Sells, and I do have the most perfect surname for my job, so get those things out of the way to begin with. I've heard it many times before. So I look after the international sales team for Bloomsbury. I've got two jobs here though, so I take care of that international team, but I also look after the global academic sales and marketing teams for Bloomsbury. So the international sales team is a team of people that are based here in London, but also 3 people that are now based in Asia. And the global academic sales and marketing team is a team of marketeers based here in the UK, also in New York, but then we have various different salespeople, again here in the UK, and then an adoption sales team in America. So it's a really diverse team, it's a great team, but they're the areas that I'm predominantly responsible for here.
That's great, thank you. I should just say that I'm Petra, and I look after all our core kind of marketing functions. So I look after CRM and database, email marketing, digital marketing, social media, the website, which contains about 60,000 titles, gets about 5 million visitors a year, and the events program like the Bloomsbury Institute that Lisa runs, and also our marketing design. So all our, not the jacket design, I have 3 designers in my team who do all our advertising. So they do everything from like little assets to go on Twitter to posters that you'll see on the side of a bus, catalogues, all our kind of marketing collateral as well. So, I bet a lot of people here are very keen to know, how did we all get into publishing? How did we manage to make that transition from studying or interning and all the rest of it? So, I will try not to show my age, but I will confess that I was a graduate recruit at Macmillan. That was my first job in publishing back in the 90s, when they still had a graduate recruit scheme. So, I've worked in lots of different companies, and I've worked in magazine publishing at Haymarket for a long time. I worked at Forbes. And I've worked for a couple of other book publishers as well. So if the panel could tell us what their first job was and how they ended up coming along to Bloomsbury, a little potted summary.
Of course. So actually my first job was in foreign rights. So I worked for about a year at a little tiny publisher down in Sussex, because I went to university there. which I really enjoyed, and I would say that I think often people want to get into editorial because that's the bit they know about, but I think it's worth saying that there are lots of brilliant jobs in publishing, and also don't despair if your first job is not in editorial. Most people I know that come into editorial will come via other ways, and I think actually it's really often very useful, I think, to get a sense of how publishing works. You've probably already got a sense from listening to Jacqueline that this is a very international company and it's a very international industry generally. So often I say to people who are starting out, don't just think of the UK, think of the wider markets, think of the English language markets, think of translation, things like that. But then I realised working in foreign rights, I worked with very lovely people, but they were numbers people that happened to work in books, and I was a books person that was working in numbers, so I was like, this isn't going to work. So I handed in my notice and moved to London, and I was very lucky. I got a temporary job working at Penguin, working on the Penguin Classics for 6 months. And whilst I was there, they then offered me a maternity cover position, so I did a year working on serious non-fiction, which was mainly above my head, but I worked with a lovely boss, so that was brilliant. And then when that was coming to an end, I wrote to lots and lots of people in publishing and said, please could I go for a coffee with you and talk about what I would like to do? And luckily one of those people got back to me and said, sure, come in and see me. And from there I got my first job at Random House. And I worked at Random House in total for 11 years, doing a number of different roles. I was very lucky that I got to a certain point, and I was looking after all their paperback publishing of the crime books, and they were like, do you want a job commissioning this? And I was like, yes please. So I did that for about 4.5 years. I worked at part of Random House called Harville Sacker, and we specialised in international literature and a lot in translation, so I published authors like Joe Nesbo. Some of you might know the film of The Snowman's out at the moment. It's apparently terrible, which is such a shame because the book is great. I published authors like Ruth Ware. I published a writer called Denise Miner, who's absolutely brilliant, and then new writers like someone called Abir Mukherjee, who's wonderful and just won a CWA Dagger a couple of weeks ago. And then at the beginning of last year, Bloomsbury came to me and said, would you like to come and set up a new imprint for us? And I was like, yeah, I think I would. And I joined at the end of June, and I've been here ever since, and it's great.
Thank you.
I started out as a bookseller originally. I'd had a long degree in design and I couldn't get a job. And I was sort of disillusioned after doing a few work placements in ad agencies and that sort of thing. So I ended up taking a job at Waterstones, and then it sort of hit me that books need covers. So that's sort of what I ended up doing. I mean, well, in a roundabout way, I ended up working for a magazine for a year as a sort of junior there, which was a sort of trial by fire because the deadlines are just horrendous. And so, you know, a few sort of junior positions came up in publishing as cover designers. And I started out as maternity cover for Suzanne Dean at Vintage, and Alison was there at the same time, a couple of floors below me. And I stayed there doing various maternity positions for 3 years, and then came here to do maternity positions. So I sort of felt like a male nurse or something. And so, yes, since then I've just sort of carried on doing covers and sort of, yeah, Bloomsbury works. It's a very nice place to work at.
Okay, and then I started, well, I was doing my degree, and I don't even know if sandwich degrees even exist now, but when I was doing my degree they did. So it meant that you could have a year in industry. So I was paid £9,000 a year to go and work for a small publishing company called Thomas Nelson in Surrey. So I was amazed. They were paying me, I was working in the promotions department, I was buying print, I was buying design, I was having a ball. And then I went back to university, so I finished my degree, phoned up my old boss when I graduated, and he gave me my job back. It was the easiest entry into publishing. So I just stayed there a year, and I knew that I didn't want to stay there long term. Applied for a job that was advertised in The Guardian. Do the media adverts still have to in The Guardian on one day? I'm not sure. Anyway, assistant marketing manager at Oxford University Press. So I applied for the job, got it, handed in my notice at Thomas Nelson. I remember the HR director saying to me, this is the worst decision you could ever make, Jacqueline. You don't want to leave Thomas Nelson, and you certainly don't want to go and work for that university press. So I stayed there for 12 years, and 1 year later, Thomas Nelson was sold to Stanley Thorne, so they became Stanley Thorne's another children's educational publisher, moved everyone from Surrey to Cheltenham. So I had an incredible career at OUP, as I say, stayed there for 12 years, started as an assistant marketing manager, left as head of international sales for the academic division. It's a charity, it's a fantastic place to work, and I moved really because 12 years in the same place is quite a long time, so I would encourage all of you to move around as much as you can as you start your publishing careers. I started to work for Scholastic, So I was there for 3 years as their Europe, Middle East and Africa sales director. So again, looking after a really diverse team based in various different parts of the world. And then in 2013, I applied for my job at Bloomsbury, and that was just advertised in the bookseller. Didn't hear anything from Bloomsbury for about a month. Thought, this is a bit weird. You know, I just thought with my experience, I might have been offered an interview. Phoned up the HR director, and my application had never actually made its way into Bloomsbury. So I was so pleased that I'd actually chased and followed up. Came in for an interview really quickly. I think I was offered the job within about a week without bigging myself up too much. And it's been an incredible journey. It's fantastic to work here. It's one of the most diverse and interesting publishing companies that I've worked for. And for me, it's brought in all of that academic, trade, children's experience as well. So really lucky career progression so far, and I hope it continues.
Thank you. I think everybody makes some really interesting points there about how I think when you start out, when you think your first job is going to set the tone for the rest of your life, and this is how it is. And I think everybody here is an example of the exact opposite of that. That in fact people move, there are opportunities, there are openings, there are changes. I came to Bloomsbury through a different route, which is acquisition. That I was head of marketing at an academic publisher called Continuum. And I ran the marketing team in the UK and New York. We had an office of 12 people in New York with 3-4 marketers there. And we got bought by Bloomsbury. One day I went in, it was the 11th of July 2011, I remember the day. And then Jonathan Glasspool, who's the MD of our non-consumer division, and Nigel Newton turned up. And one really tall and one really short, and they were very friendly, and we asked them loads of questions, and they were like, hey, we bought you, come to us. And so we were in this horrible building at Waterloo, which has since been declared unsafe because of asbestos. And we got whisked here. And then it's suddenly like, now you can all come and work here in Bedford Square. So that was over 6 years ago. So in the last, I was saying to somebody earlier that in the years since Bloomsbury made its money, the Harry Potter millions, it's acquired or bought either the list or the entire company of 30 different companies. So a lot of the 600 odd people who work here didn't apply to Bloomsbury, didn't come to Bloomsbury. They got bought as part of a kind of bigger deal. They came as part of an acquisition deal. So I think there's so many different ways to end up working somewhere, and the thing is just to be kind of receptive and open to it and kind of make your chances. I had somebody who worked here who came up on a 2-week work experience as a website editor, and she left 16 years later. So it was the longest work experience, stage in history, really. I think. So the next question, which is kind of quite a nice segue, and I think we've already alluded a bit to it, in terms of the variety of the work here in Bloomsbury and how I think people can stay here a long time. I've been here 6 years and my job's changed quite a lot while I've been here at Bloomsbury because the company keeps changing. Is what's different or unique about Bloomsbury, would you say, from other publishing companies where you've worked?
Well, I worked in a very small publishing company first off, and then I went to work for Penguin and then for Random House. Obviously, they then merged and became Penguin Random House. So they were very big corporate publishers. Before I started in publishing, I imagined all publishers looked like this, and it was to be all lovely. And then I went to work for a series of large ones, and was like, oh. And I think the thing I love most about Bloomsbury is that I get lots of freedom here, which is very lovely. So I used to work at a much bigger house, and so you have more limited slots that you can publish, and it's very competitive. So I was in my division. I was one of probably about 18 to 20 commissioning editors, and there were 5 or so divisions. So there were a lot of people competing in-house. Whereas here, one of the things I love most is there are 5 of us commissioning editors in the adult trade, and we don't compete with each other. We're not in any way competitive, but we're very collaborative. We like each other's books, we're all very literary, we're very interested in what each other are doing, but we're not also trying to publish into the same areas, which is something I personally really enjoy. And what I also enjoy is that you have, I think, many of our most successful books at Bloomsbury have been ones that don't necessarily fit neatly into any category, which is, as an editor, really enjoyable. So things like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is one of my favourite books. Things like George Saunders, he was writing short stories for years, and we were publishing him until he wrote Lincoln, which is his first novel, and it was wonderful. And I think sometimes at bigger houses, you have to be a bit more straightforward. You have to be like, this is your crime, or this is your debut, this is your literary fiction. And what I like is the fact that I get to do a bit of everything here. One of the books I wanted to talk about is a book I'm publishing in February next year. And it's this amazing book called The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and my pitch for it is Agatha Christie meets Inception. So the premise of it is that it's set in a big country house, got quite a 1930s feel, everyone's gathered for a big party, and at the end of the day the daughter of the house is murdered. And our narrator is told until he can solve her murder, the day will keep repeating itself over and over again, always ending with her death. Trouble is, every time it starts again, he wakes up in somebody else's body. So he starts off as a doctor, he becomes a butler, he becomes a beast businessman, and they're all interacting with each other at the same time. So it's a bit like reading an episode of Doctor Who, and it's incredibly fun and bonkers. But I know a lot of other editors who absolutely adored it, but it was much harder to persuade other people in their houses to support it because people were like, well, what is this book? Whereas here at Bloomsbury, I said to everyone, this book is a little bit bonkers, and everyone was like, we love it. And I think that's kind of part of the reason I really like being here, is that you have a lot more freedom, and also other things. So I'm here running Raven, but also in the time I came here, I said, why didn't we do any classics? Because I came from a publisher that had a very big backlist. I worked on vintage classics, I worked on Penguin classics, and I was like, we should do that. So we did the Bloomsbury Modern Classics that you'll have seen that Greg designed. And again, in other publishing companies, if you're the crime editor, you wouldn't necessarily be able to be like, sure, can I do this? But everybody was like, great, give it a go. And I think there's something really lovely about that. There's something that people are very open to ideas, which is really nice and it's really enjoyable. And I also think Bloomsbury's great in the sense that we're small, but we're not tiny, so we've got heft. So retailers take us seriously, literary festivals take us seriously, journalists take us seriously. But also, we're not so big that books get lost, because I think if you do work at bigger houses, sometimes that can be quite hard, you know, for your lovely debut to be the one that gets all the attention if you're also publishing huge names, whether that be like Dan Brown or whoever it is. So there's something quite nice here about being able to have a little bit more space for your authors. And often that's what authors like as well. There are kind of different reasons why you might want to be at different houses, but because we're smaller, we can put you in for more prizes, because you're normally given a limited number of slots for certain prizes. So at big houses, you might already have all the people that will go in for the Booker Prize. Whereas here we've got a little bit more freedom to do things like that. We can just get excited, I think, about different things. So that's why I like it very much here.
I guess for me, coming from a magazine which was sort of a shambles in like northwest London, like the sort of belly button of nowhere, and then coming to quite a corporate environment at Random House, with I don't know, just a certain vibe about the place, and then you come here to like a lovely Georgian townhouse. We used to be based in Soho Square, in this lovely building right next to Paramount and 20th Century Fox and all that sort of stuff, and opposite the Toucan, which was handy. But it was sort of just a family atmosphere, and the people were nice, very willing, as Alison sort of said, willing to take chances, and also, you know, put your money on a horse that might not have done it otherwise. You know, for instance, like George Saunders this summer, you know, this autumn rather, you know, I've done his jackets. I used to hand sell his jackets at Waterstones and be like, this is great, you know, if you like short stories, this is your guy. And then we've published, you know, since we've published, I've done his short story jackets since, and then he pulls out this thoroughbred. And, you know, it's things like that. You know, Bloomsbury throws up quite a lot of surprises, which is quite good. And I feel like if you have a good art director and a great team around you, they will, and you know, it applies to editorial as well, you know, if they see what your strengths are and you have a good boss, they will give you briefs that will stretch you and, you know, focus on your best aspects, and then you'll, you know, keep getting better and all that sort of stuff. So that's why I like Bloomsbury. Yeah.
Cool. And I think just following on from what Alison was saying, I was talking to another international sales director recently at an unnamed large publishing house, and he was basically saying that the books that are commissioned are just presented to the sales team. All of the decisions have been made already, and they're the books that they're told to sell that season. And I think here at Bloomsbury, we don't work in that way. We have a really strong reading culture. We have acquisition meetings every week. Everybody is invited to attend those meetings, and everybody's voice is heard when we're making those decisions about the books that we'll commit to. And these might be books that we'll be publishing in 5 or 6 years' time, but everybody has that moment to say how they feel about it and to really get behind it. And we do go into it as a team. It's a full-on commitment. It's sales, it's marketing, it's publicity, it's editorial. I haven't, apart from Scholastic, I haven't worked for another trade publishing house, but certainly at Oxford University Press, everything had to be approved by the delegates. You know, these are academics. It has to go to a fortnightly meeting within the university. They're the ones that are approving all of the new proposals that come through. And so it's a very long and rigorous process, and it's very different here, particularly on the trade side. I think the other thing as well for international sales, we're selling everything that Bloomsbury publish. So as much as most of what we're talking about is the trade list, we also have obviously the Incredible Children's list, but the academic list, the special interest list, we've also got digital resources too. So for us, we've always got something to offer a customer, no matter what, and to have that kind of really diverse range of products is really important for us. So I also think we're really nimble. I mean, we've sort of alluded to that already. We can make decisions really quickly, we can react, and so I think being in that position to respond fast to changing markets and changing customer needs as well, it's something that's really unique for us, I think. So.
Yeah, I think Jacqueline's absolutely right. Jacqueline and I work across all of Bloomsbury's output, and I think Bloomsbury's very different in that we haven't kind of siloed the divisions, so we don't have a children's division and an education division, an academic division that we still have. So my team, like in digital marketing, email, social media, website, we have everything together. It's all on one platform, it's all mixed together, and that's really nice. It's so varied, and it just keeps changing. Every day is quite different, and with all those acquisitions, with the different directions that the company's going in, launching whole digital platforms that we've done for academic and also non-academic as well, coming up next year. We're launching an early years platform. I hope I can say that. I think it's out in the public domain. For childminders and nurseries now. That's coming next year. So it's always on the move. It's always changing, which is great. I'm going to skip now to because we're about halfway through, we've done about half an hour, to the sector-specific questions. And the first one, if Alison's voice is still holding up, I'm going to ask Alison some editorial questions. So Raven Books, which I think, is it right to say, Greg, you designed the logo for this, the Edgar Allan Poe allusion, I think, to Edgar Allan Poe's Raven there. Could you tell us a bit about what fun you had setting up this new imprint, coming in with a kind of blank slate, if that was the case, and how you've got a few of the books there that are out now. If you could tell us a bit about how you went about that process.
So when I started, I did inherit various authors that we already had commissioned that kind of fell into my area. But the idea with Raven was to do something that Bloomsbury wasn't really doing before. We had got a few crime authors, but we never really had someone specifically to focus on this area. And I suppose what I often say about Raven is it's not really a crime imprint, so it's quite often an imprint about books that have crimes in them. So there are books on my list that could easily sit on a literary fiction list, or they might sit somewhere else. And that's what I look for, is that really what I'm interested in doing are books that are fresh and original. If anybody is a crime reader, you're probably aware that the market is very saturated at the moment. It's full of kind of psychological thrillers still. I don't understand how these are still surviving. And I don't want to do that. I have a small list, so ideally I want to do between 8 to 10 hardbacks a year, and I want each of those books to stand out and be doing something different. And one of the great things about working in a big publisher is that you do understand how many books are coming out, and you do get very good at pitching because you're not used to competing against lots and lots of people. So I'm really focused. I very rarely bring things to acquisition meetings because I'm really fussy about what I do, and I want to make sure that when I am bringing them, I'm giving my colleagues in sales and publicity and design something new and exciting to say about them. So the first books I've kind of signed up for Raven, I bought one from the US, which meant I didn't need to edit it, so I could just publish that very, very quickly. A book called The River at Night, which Greg designed for me, which is about women going whitewater rafting in the Maine wilderness and ending horribly, as you can imagine. But my first book that I edited myself, so my first sort of real book in some ways, was this incredibly beautiful book called Silent Companions, which I published at the beginning of last month, and is a ghost story. I've been trying to find a ghost story for absolutely years. I said that to every agent I met, and it just wasn't particularly fashionable at the time. And I was like, but that's what I really want to find. And I think one of the lovely things about being an editor often is that you are just a bit ahead of the curve. So it normally takes a year from the point I buy a book to the point it's published. And by the time a year had elapsed, everybody else wanted to read a ghost story as well, so that's incredibly pleasing. This was picked for Simon Mayer's Radio 2 book club. We also just made an effort to design the most beautiful jacket, because I really wanted this to be a book that you would buy as a gift and you would give it to people, because I think that's really important. And it's had the most amazing reception, which has been a joy, and the author is lovely as well, which always helps. And then the other books I mentioned, Stuart's Seven Deaths, my kind of Agatha Christie Inception one, that to me was completely fun and original. I could see who to sell it to, lots of crime fans, but also I knew it was doing something a little bit different. And it's already been sold in quite a few territories abroad, and the TV rights have been bought, which is amazing, because I can't wait to see how they're going to film it. I have no idea. But essentially what I look for are books that are original. I do a lot of editing with my authors, so I will do at least 4 drafts normally. So I need to have something that each time I read it is interesting. I read a lot of books that are perfectly good, but I don't have any desire to go back and read them again. Whereas with all of my books, I have a real thing that every time I go back, I discover something new, or I'm just so impressed by the cleverness of it. There's a couple of books I'm publishing that have really smart twists. And when you read it through again and you just see how it fits together, it's just so joyful. But also, I like doing books that are kind of a little bit different in other ways. I'm publishing a book next spring, which Greg has done the jacket for, which is set in Victorian London and has a transgender main character, which I just thought was so interesting, because it's not just a horrible plot point, it's actually a central part of the main character. And actually with that book, when I was sent it, it was so wonderful, and I phoned the agent up and I said, this has to be the start of a series, and she said, oh, thank God you said that, because that's what we were thinking, but we didn't want to send it out as a series in case people weren't sure about it. But yeah, I try and do books as well on that kind of 8 to 10 a year. I will try and have a mix, so I will try and have some that are the more commercial end, some that are more literary. I will try and have some that are standalones, some that are part of a series, because I think as an editor I want to be talking to different people, and I don't want to be going back to the same people over and over again and saying, here's another detective series. I don't really see the point of that. Like, if I've got an amazing detective series signed up, I don't need another one, and I don't think it's fair on my authors to be competing within themselves, within Raven. And one of the lovely things about starting a new imprint is that my authors, because they're so new, they've all been such good friends, and they're reading each other's book, and I think it's really lovely for them because they really stand out. So Laura's book being a ghost story, none of the rest of them are writing a ghost story, so they all just get to enjoy it. They don't get to think, oh God, I should have written this, which I think is really important for them as well. I want them all to feel they've got space and that they're not sort of third tier, as it were. I want them to feel like this is our big standalone, this is our big thriller, whatever it is. Yeah, I can't remember if that really answered your question, Petra, or if I just gone on a thing.
It's so good, it answered the next question as well.
I'm so efficient in
So that's fantastic. Well, it's quite interesting. I'm going to take a slight angle on this one, because, sorry, this is going slightly sort of off-piste of what's here, because I think people may be quite interested in the whole kind of idea about how did you come up with the name Raven? Was there a kind of brainstorming? The particular question here is actually, did the first title set the tone for the rest of the imprint? But I think you've explained why you chose that one, because it was quite an easy win.
Yeah.
It was quite a quick thing, and you knew it was going to take a year before you could bring out ones that you were more your kind of babies, as it were. So could you talk a bit about the logistics? Were there design meetings, editorial meetings, sales meetings about how did you pick the name Raven? I know we had a lovely launch party, we had tote bags, there was a whole kind of, it's all about the tote bags, really.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, this is for, again, the joy of going from somewhere very big where we had to have multiple meetings about everything. When I was thinking of names, I thought of ravens just because I think I like things that are gothic. I think ravens have that kind of feel to them. They're quite sinister. I think they're quite cool. I was also, having worked at Penguin, where they get to have lots of fun with their logo, I did think it'd be really good to have an animal or a bird, because you can do kind of playful things with it. Obviously, there's Edgar Allan Poe, so it kind of, in some ways, I wanted a name that felt like it might have been around for a lot longer, rather than something that felt very zeitgeisty, that might date in a few years. So I came up with a name, and so I wrote down all my reasons for why it should be called that. And I went and had a meeting with Emma, who's our MD, and Kathleen, who's like our head of everything, marketing, publicity, sales. And I sat down and I said, I'd like to call it Raven, and I was about to go into my list of reasons. And they went, great, sure. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, do you want to hear my reasons? And they're like, no, it's a great name. And I was like, okay, brilliant. And then actually, I think the kind of briefing process was quite straightforward as well.
It was lots of claws and feathers and bird type things.
We had quite a few versions we looked at.
We did, creepy R's and all sorts of. Yeah, we ended up with our
yeah, we want to
Was
say...
it Mortimer?
Yeah, Mortimer as a Raven. So if
Mortimer,
anybody... there's a Joan Aiken who wrote Mortimer and Arabella, which you might not know was a children's series, and Arabella, the little girl, her dad is a taxi driver and brings home Mortimer the Raven, who eats things, he eats everything. And I remember this really clearly, so he's always been named Mortimer our Raven. Nobody else has heard of this at all, so I don't understand why it's only me that ever read these books or saw the very weird BBC adaptation they did. But Mortimer the Raven, but we had a lot. We looked at lots where we spelled out the word raven, we looked at lots where it was just the bird.
Yeah.
We had some that were amazingly clever, but we just thought actually when they're on the spine, it might be harder
It's
to
too
see.
small to...
Yeah. But it's actually, there's all kinds of things we've been able to have lots of fun with Raven, which is really nice. It sort of gave us lots of enjoyable things we could do marketing-wise, which actually, you know, makes it sound more planned than it was in some weird way. Like retrospectively, we've been able to fit a lot of things to it. And funny enough, I had a joke with my authors that they need to put ravens in all of their books. Because in some of them, I think Laura's, because it's a ghost story, there are lots of crows hanging around. Stu's book has a raven court character. So occasionally ravens do crop up, which is quite nice, but we're definitely not going to put them in everything, I promise, like an Easter egg. Although one of my authors, I was delighted, I bought this amazing book, and Jacqueline was saying we move very fast at Bloomsbury, and it's true, I bought this book so quickly. It's a book called Social Creature, which is it's kind of like the female talent of Mr. Ripley, set in contemporary New York. It's absolutely brilliant. And the author, when I was saying, you know, explained to her about Raven, unprompted, she said, "Oh, I have a taxidermy raven called Mortimer." And I was like, "Oh my God, you're meant to be published." So she lives in New York now, and she says the raven is in Oxford, I think, but she promises one day she's going to bring him in. And because I have a Halloween raven I bought from Sainsbury's for £4, and he wears a crown. But I feel I need to like work up. Yeah, I think I need to build myself up to once my books are making lots of money, then I feel I can justify buying a taxidermy raven. They're really expensive. Like if you need a sideline, go into taxidermy, honestly, to support the publishing career. But yeah, and I think it does. Raven does set the tone, because I think what we wanted to do was we are a literary publishing house, and we wanted something that had a feel of quality and had some kind of resonances with classic literature, because I think that is what we wanted to spell out. We didn't want something that dated. We also didn't want something... I was very lucky, but I talked to an editor I know who set an imprint up somewhere else, and everything they came up with as a name, I don't know what he was coming up with, was in use by somebody else, and we were very lucky that actually there is a German Ravensburger, but there wasn't a Ravens books already, so yeah, that was lucky.
Very fortunate. I do like a good Ravensburger jigsaw. I happen to know that's what they do. It sounds like you were destined to do Raven with Mortimer. There was obviously something written in the stars there when you were 5 or whatever, reading your
Although I would
books.
say, just to go back to something you said, when I came into publishing, I assumed I would work in children's books. That's what I wanted to do. And I really wanted to work in children's books. And then I got a job in rights, and then I got a job working with classics. And then I was quite literary, so I assumed I'd work on really literary fiction. And instead I've ended up with this job, which I absolutely love. And you know, I'm allowed to do what I like, which is great. So I would also say, I think Petra said this, like about being open-minded about where you might go and work, whether it's trade, whether it's academic, whatever it is. Also be open-minded about the kind of books you work on. Most people graduate and think they'll work on very high-end literary fiction, but actually there aren't those many jobs, and you might find, as I did, that you can have so much fun doing this kind of book, or you might discover that you absolutely love serious non-fiction or whatever it is. So I would just say, like, don't ever go in with too fixed an idea of what you might do or where you might want to work. Because it's funny, I was talking to somebody about where your dream job might be. If you'd asked me before I got into publishing what my dream job would have been, it wouldn't be this, but now this is my dream job. So like do you know, embrace all options, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And the thing is as well, you learn the basics, you learn the ropes, and certainly in a lot of smaller companies, and I think Bloomsbury is kind of a big company that feels like a smaller company. In lots of ways, you get given more responsibility, and you learn so much, and that applies whether you're doing, you know, some of our nautical books or children's books or fiction or whatever it is. It's so much of it is transferable. It's all the same. Jacqueline, I'm going to ask you to turn to you now, the sales, and talking about how you sell to people in different countries, different languages, and all the rest of it. So the question is particularly about Frankfurt Book Fair, which was a month ago now. Probably seems like a distant memory. You've done lots of deals since. You've probably been to about 6 countries since then. Jacqueline's air miles. I just dread to think what her air mile tally is. So the question is, with so many publishers pitching for attention, how do you keep your book proposals original?
Okay, how do we keep our book proposals original? It's an ongoing challenge, I think. And because, like I say, we're selling across all of the